Now look at the poem. On first looking into Chapman's Homer. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. After one wide expanse had I been told that deep-browed Homer ruled earth's domain. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene, till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Quades, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon peak in Darien. Keats wrote altogether 64 sonnets, mostly in the form of Petrarchan or Italian sonnet. On first looking into Chapman's Homer, written in 1816, is his best-known sonnet, and is generally considered to be his first major poem. It shows the admiration and wonders Keats experienced when he first read Chapman's translation of Homer's epics. Keats wrote this famous sonnet when he was only 20 and had little experience in writing sonnets. But this sonnet is a fine testimony of the effect of poetry on Keats. In the autumn of 1816, Keats spent one night reading poetry with his friend Charles Cowden Clarke, who introduced to him some of the best passages from Chapman's translation of Homer, and Keats was delighted with the vigorous language of the Elizabethan. To him, Chapman spoke out loud and bold. After Keats left Clarke, around daybreak, he walked to his lodging, wrote his tribute to Chapman, and had a copy of this poem on his friend's breakfast table by 10 o'clock in the morning. And this is the first draft of Keats on first looking into Chapman's Homer. This poem seems to have been written in the white heat of excitement and in the flash of inspiration. He didn't make many changes. Here in this poem, Keats makes particularly effective use of the natural diction of a Petrarchan sonnet. The theme of exploration dominates the octave, with the metaphor of the poet as a literary adventure. And this is followed by the theme of discovery in the sextet, with the use of similes through which Keats attempts to express his wonder. The pivotal moment of the sonnet, the thematic turn of the sonnet, is the reading of Chapman's Homer. Now let's look at the poem line by line. Much have I travelled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. Round many western islands have I been, which bards in fealty to Apollo hold. Keats enjoyed wide experience of reading poetry, and was familiar with Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. But not until 1816 did he have the special aesthetic enjoyment in his first reading of Chapman's translation of Homer. Realms of gold. In the first line here, this phrase, realms of gold, is a metaphor, referring to the realms of great books. The poet compares himself to a searcher of gold, who has travelled in his imagination to many lands of poetry. So here we have the metaphor of the poet as a literary adventurer. The states and kingdoms in the second line continue the metaphorical idea of the realms of gold in the previous line, also referring to the states and kingdoms of great books. The word goodly means beautiful. Round many western islands have I been. Figuratively speaking, the imaginary western islands in the third line, echoing back to the states and kingdoms and the realms of gold in the first two lines, are also a metaphor referring to the realms of great poetry. But compared with the world of Homer's epics, other Western lyric works are only small islands. Which bards in fealty to Apollo hold? Bards means poets. Fealty, allegiance, loyalty. Apollo refers to Greek god of poetry and god of poetic inspiration. Since Apollo is the god of poetry in Greek mythology, the Asian poets of Western world pledged allegiance to Apollo. This first quatrain is a metaphorical presentation of the experience Keats has already had as a reader of poetry. Keats wrote this sonnet when poetry meant more to him than anything else in the world. He was on the point of giving up the security of a career in medicine for the uncertainties of a career in poetry. In Chapman's Homer, Keats excitedly communicates the experience of discovering the realms of gold. Now let's look at our second quatrain. Oft of one wide expanse had I been told, that deep-browed Homer ruled earth's domain. Yet did I never breathe his pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Here in line 5, wide expanse means vast territory. In contrast with the western islands of great poetry, Homer's epics are of much wider expanse, much vaster territory than those western islands. Deep-browed means meditative, thoughtful, resourceful, as indicated by a well-developed forehead. So here in line 6, it refers to Homer's profound knowledge and insight. Domain means estate, land property. Yet did I never breathe its pure serene till I heard Chapman speak out loud and bold. Serene means atmosphere. So pure serene, pure atmosphere. Bold means daring. Keats' epithets of loud and bold here show that he had a perfect understanding of Chapman's translation of Homer. Here in the second quatrain, the poet expands sufficiently his metaphorical expression of the excitement he experienced in his first reading of Homer's epics. The pure atmosphere in Homer's epics seems to have intoxicated Keats when he heard his friend Clark's reading aloud of some most famous passages from Chapman's translation of Homer. Now, as I have mentioned, that Keats in this sonnet makes particularly effective use of the natural division of a Petrarchan sonnet. In the octave, we see the theme of exploration with the metaphor of the poet as a literary adventurer who has been to many western islands, states and kingdoms, and realms of gold. Now let's see what happens in the sestet. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies, when a new planet swims into his ken, or like stout Quades, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon peak in Darien. Then felt I like some watcher of the skies when a new planet swims into his ken. This then, at the beginning of line 9, indicates the turn of theme in this Petrarchan sonnet. Keats' term is his two comparisons taken from astronomy and exploration. Unity and coherence are assured not only by carrying the idea of discovery all the way through the poem, but also by using such words as much and oft to begin the two quatrains, and the word then to begin his sestet. Instead of the metaphor of the poet as a literary adventurer in the octave, here in the sestet we have the simile comparing the poet to a watcher of the skies and an astronomer who discovers a new planet. Swims into his ken here means comes into his range of sight. The verb swims describes the way in which a heavenly body will move into a circular lens of an astronomer's telescope, suggesting perfectly the motion of a planet when seen from the Earth. Here in lines 9 to 10 is the first beautiful simile Keats uses in conveying to reader the thrill of discovery he experienced in hearing Clarke's reading from Chapman's Homer to him. The discovery of the planet was so rare that only one had been made before 1781, when Sir William Herschel discovered the planet Uranus. Keats might have Herschel's discovery in mind, and it is very reasonable for Keats to compare his delight in his first looking into Chapman's Homer to the overwhelming emotions of the discoverer of the planet. Or like stout Quade's, when with eagle eyes he stared at the Pacific, and all his men looked at each other with a wild surmise, silent upon peak in Darien. Quades here refers to the Spanish conqueror of Mexico, but in fact it was Balboa, not Quades, who was the first European explorer to see the Pacific Ocean from Darien, a peak in Panama. And stout means fearless. With eagle eyes suggests that Quades was alert. Perhaps only such a man who was fearless and alert could have discovered the Pacific Ocean. With wild surmise, this means that Quades' men stood about him and looked at each other with a wild surmise. It seems as if their minds were flooded by a bewildering variety of untold possibilities of discoveries. They were so shocked with emotion that they just stood there bewildered. This sonnet has been much admired for its power and directness, particularly these last 4 lines, with a sense of awe so strikingly conveyed by the image of Quades staring at the Pacific, while his men wait, wondering what overwhelming sight has produced this state of frozen amazement and exultation in their leader. So I say Keats was also keenly interested in exploring the art of sonnet, and this sonnet is the finest testimony of Keats' talent in writing sonnets.